North Carolina football recruiting target Daevin Hobbs is set to announce his college choice next Monday, August 1st. But he just announced that he's pushing back his commitment date, and you know why? He's taking another visit this weekend to Tuscaloosa. Should we be worried?
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Thursday, July 28th, 2022. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and I want to thank you for making Locked On Tar Heels your first listen or your first watch every single day. I want to remind you that the show is free and available anywhere you get podcasts. Very easy to subscribe. Go ahead and do that now. And if you would, while you're there and watching, smash the like button and leave some comments on these football recruits we're talking about today. One more reminder, tomorrow's show is a mailbag show. Great questions already coming in. One last chance to do that and join in. But today, it is a big football recruiting day. We got a commitment coming up on Saturday from Braeden Marshall. We're going to find out more intel from John Garcia Jr. about that right now. It's great to be joined here on Locked On Tar Heels today by John Garcia Jr., Sports Illustrated's Director of Football Recruiting. As always, we want to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor of the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free right now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. John, those words are too close together, man. I get that mixed up all the time. It's crazy. Hey, it's great to have you, brother. I know big and great things are happening in your life in the coming months, and so, boy, just exciting stuff. I know we're still in July. We're wrapping it up, but still some more commitments ahead, including this coming Saturday, 2 days from now. We will have Braeden Marshall committing to either Nebraska, Wisconsin, or North Carolina. Now, I know you were talking to my Wisconsin colleague earlier today. I hope you gave him bad news, and I hope you're going to give me good news.
Yeah, this one has been an interesting race. I think, the Lake Mary prospect right outside of Orlando, there was optimism for UCF like 2 weeks ago in this race. And then all of a sudden he announces this top three well out of state, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Nebraska. And now there's a lot of questions around this commitment coming Saturday. So shout out to Braeden for doing a good job on his end. He took these trips, and you could tell in hearing him talk that he's pulled different things from the trips. Wisconsin, big DB class already, but just Jim Leonard, kind of that professionalism, number one defense in the country last year. He would add to that, makes sense. Nebraska, kind of the upstart program that has begun to churn out DBs at the highest level. Cam Taylor-Britt, early round pick in the draft this past year. NIL's big deal up in Nebraska these days. Scott Frost even talked about it recently. And then North Carolina, Hall of Fame coach, Dre Bly. I know that's a person, in his positional recruiter that he trusts, because Dre has been there and done that, which isn't the case across the board in some of the coaches that are recruiting him. Hall of Fame coach Mack Brown, by the way.
For sure.
I have to reiterate that to your audience. But yes, Dre Bly, very good. Not quite Hall of Fame yet. And I think that has resonated with Braeden from the beginning of his recruitment. So you could really almost build a case for all three of these programs. But again, I was hearing UCF buzz that, hey, maybe he stays home and plays for Gus Malzahn as they transition to the Big 12. Yeah. But here we are. So I think he's done a really good job of keeping things very close to the vest. I do hear a little bit more buzz for North Carolina compared to the other two, just since, dropping UCF, but not enough to feel confident in any one direction here. So I'm curious to see, one, if Braeden knows as of today, midweek, if he knows where he's going, or two, if there could be some twists and turns over the next couple of days leading up to that announcement itself, which is always a possibility in this day and age. So that's going to be interesting to track come Saturday. But clearly a big-time cornerback prospect, an emerger from last season who really played his way into a high-end Power 5 type of prospect. So whoever gets his commitment Saturday is getting a pretty interesting defensive back with a lot of upside.
Man, you love to hear that. I mean, geographically, Carolina is obviously going to be the closest of this
Hey, that's true.
spread out top three. But yeah, it seems like it's been a very weird thing. We're recording the show on Wednesday, just a couple hours ago. Carolina lost out on Kaleb Downs, another defensive back player. Do you think that has any ramifications for what Braeden Marshall will decide to do?
Potentially. I think, Downs is clearly a safety type. I think Braden's got some safety nickel ability. So, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, I do think that could become a bit of a factor. He's a Floridian, talking Braeden Marshall. And look, when when you talk to Florida kids, they want to play early. That's something that always comes up in kind of that competitive nature of my home state. So I do think that could be something that maybe outliers Carolina as an interesting factor relative to if he doesn't know just yet. Maybe that could push him and nudge him in a certain direction. I think it would be naive to rule something like that out, especially when Caleb's the unanimous number one safety, well known to be recruit as there is in the country. Yeah, that has to factor in.
Sure, absolutely, and as you said, obviously they're more different parts of the defensive backfield. It's just always interesting to see how those things go. Now, speaking of Kaleb Downs, I think Carolina people that are paying attention knew that they wouldn't be getting Kaleb Downs, as if you're tracking with this, he committed to Bama. But there's always just this kind of outside lingering hope. Hey, maybe Dre Bly can get his nephew. Hey, maybe Josh Downs can convince his brother to come be a Tar Heel with him. But ultimately, Downs commits to Alabama. I know it makes sense because it's Alabama, for crying out loud. But were Tar Heel fans foolish to have any outside hopes?
I don't think so. I think every school that he listed was legitimate, and Kaleb is an incredibly calculated player who's been recruited for years by all of these programs. So, yeah, I think most people viewed it as a Bama versus Georgia type of battle, but he loved Notre Dame. He thought the academics there were interesting. Obviously, the family ties to North Carolina got him back to campus multiple times. I mean, I don't think when you're that highly thought of, that calculated, and that kind of long-standing an elite prospect, or considered an elite prospect, with so many people bugging you, for a lack of a better phrase, you don't just take visits to take visits. I don't get that vibe from Kaleb. So yeah, I think there was reason to be hopeful leading up into the commitment itself. But yeah, I mean, I think the expectation was certainly that he would play in the SEC. Even Ohio State, had some up and down confidence with Downs at one point or another. So yeah, I think all five fan bases should have had some hope, but certainly some were more secure than others in this recruitment.
Yeah, and speaking of missing out, Carolina just a week or so ago lost out on Jamaal Jarrett. There had been some hopes, some of the way he interacted on social media with kind of blowing up some Carolina things that I think a lot of Tar Heel fans for a while felt that there was some promise there, but then obviously in the days leading up to his commitment, it was like, he's going to Georgia, right? And so, losing two guys at the top tier of the class to the two top schools in the nation, essentially at this point, you can't be overly sad about that. But how do you kind of spring back from that?
Yeah, I think with Jarrett, maybe it hurts a little bit more. There was, more of a top two there with Georgia, North Carolina. Auburn was to me a bit of a distant third in that race. And with him being a North Carolina native that had frequented campus so much and admitted it was his dream school, I think it does sting a little bit more relative to just a legacy prospect who had some connections to the school. But yeah, I mean, Georgia and Alabama played for the national title last year. Georgia won it. Alabama won it the year prior. I mean, it's really hard to latch on to those kids making decisions like that, especially on defense, where both programs are a little bit more well-known over the long haul period of time. But yeah, I think North Carolina is going to be fine. This class is really strong. Before this little mini run, I guess, of misses, we talked about the different types of defensive linemen that have already committed to UNC, multiple edge rushers. I know we'll talk Rico Walker here soon as well.
That's right.
Yeah, I think it's okay. The front seven recruiting is going pretty darn well. And I think the defensive line group in particular, could end up being the strength of the entire class when all is said and done. So I do think that it stings more to miss on Jarrett Pert, just from a human standpoint. But in terms of rebounding, it's the better, a more stable situation compared to the secondary, where there's a couple more question marks at this stage.
Yeah. All right, folks, you hear it here from John Garcia Jr. Deep breath, relax, and here in just a second, let's talk about Mr. Rico Walker, who John just brought up, who is another addition to this defensive front. Great news there right after I tell you about Bet Online. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. There's also reviews and news from every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information. From live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts, they have you covered. So head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening right now. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, just as we've set up, as we've said, we've been talking about this defensive front, and Carolina did get another defensive edge commit, Mr. Rico Walker, another Carolina kid, another North Carolina kid, and this is great for Mack Brown. It's great for Coach Gene Chizik and his defense. John, let's first just start by talking a little bit about Rico, and then another edge guy. Let's get into that as well.
Yeah, this was a big win for Carolina. Really no other way to put it. At different points, we heard about Georgia. Certainly heard a lot about Tennessee. He'd played 7-on-7. The last time I saw Rico was out in Las Vegas. He was playing 7-on-7 with Tennessee's quarterback commitment, Nico Iamaleava, Tennessee's safety commitment, and John Slaughter. And there was certainly a pretty public recruitment of Rico from those Tennessee pledges. And spending a weekend together out of town, you just never know how something like that's going to play out. But Carolina stayed the course and keeps a Hickory prospect within state lines. And this is a big deal because Rico is one of the most unique athletic profiles, I think, in the entire class. Again, for reference, at that tournament, he was playing tight end and he was playing really well at 6'4", 240 pounds. I mean, just an unbelievable physical specimen, an athletic specimen on top of that, who is a blank canvas. I think you can easily line him up as a true edge today. You could probably, convince him to play some tight end if you needed to. But I think where his frame is pushing me from an evaluation standpoint is maybe you add weight to this kid and he becomes a hand in the dirt, almost traditional 4-3 defensive end to where now he can play and work more inside to complement some of these other edge prospects that you've built or that you've gotten committed, because he is built in such a physical way where you can add some more mass to his frame at, again, 6'4", 240 or so. I think sky's the limit for Rico. He is not anywhere close to the finished product that he will be in the coming years. So this is one of those that you just say, I don't know the position for sure, but we know we want you. So go ahead and commit to Carolina, and we will figure it out during your first fall camp. We might move you around a little bit, but it's going to work out in the end no matter where he ends up, because this is he calls himself the specimen, and it's warranted in this regard. He can do a lot of things from a football perspective, and he fits the modern game as well. He is built for space. He is built to move, even though he's built physically for great size and strength.
And we've got these two guys we talked about a couple weeks ago, Jaybron Harvey and Tyler Thompson. If you look at these three dudes, and I know we're talking about with Rico Walker that he could move around, but if we're keeping them out on the edge, how would you rank these three guys as of today? I'm not necessarily projecting where they will be, but as of today.
The other two are so similar. I know we talked about it. It's a floor versus ceiling conversation with the two. Sure. So I think if you're talking about ranking them as pass rushers today in terms of, hey, these guys are going to play early, I'd go with those two over Rico for that specific role. But if we're just talking football development, high ceiling, long-term projection, I'm going to go Rico because I just think there's so much potential there. I don't want to, I shouldn't do this, but coming out of high school, Travon Walker, who just went number 1 in the draft, was this same kind of situation where you're like, I don't even know what he's going to play, but whenever he figures it out, it's going to be pretty darn great. Now, I don't want to compare them athletically because I do think Travon was a unicorn, and we saw it at the combine. That's why he went number 1, all that stuff confirmed. But there are a little bit of similarities with Rico from an athletic profile standpoint and kind of just this understanding of, let's just get him on campus and we'll figure it out, whether it's 5 technique, 7 technique, he's playing with his hand in the dirt, he bulks all the way up and moves to 3 or 5. Either way, he's going to have a big-time, long-term impact. By the time he's an upperclassman at Carolina, I think we'll be talking about Rico before the other two in terms of the impact. But earlier, I'd go elsewhere.
Okay. Interesting. Love that. That's really interesting. Listen, I'm not going to hold you to that comparison, but you just got all my hopes up for what's going to happen. So no big deal. And everyone watching and listening. So just there's the grave you've dug, and now you got to go lie in it, John. So
I'll live with it. It wouldn't be the first time, but it's the name that popped into my head. So hey, we got to go full transparency here on Locked On Tar Heels.
I love that, John. Thank you so much. So we've got one more place we want to go. Carolina has another recruit that they seem to be in the lead for. He's supposed to commit on Monday, August 1st, but he's pushing things back. Do we need to be worried? We're going to talk about it in just a second. Okay, so this is what I was teasing just a second ago. Daevin Hobbs, we've talked about him on this show several weeks ago, and things look promising for Carolina. Many recruiting sites are looking at Carolina as the landing spot for Daevin Hobbs. He's supposed to commit August 1st. That's what he stated. But then about a week ago, he tweeted this. Ellipsis, ... Big decisions take time. I'll be postponing my commitment date. Now, John, before we even get into it, I just want to say, to me, he has every right to do this. I would rather, as a dad, we were talking about being parents earlier. As a dad, I would rather you take your time. I'd rather you get it right and be in the landing spot that is right for you and your skill set and who you are as a person. But at the same time, I know that when you've put out these commitment dates into the world, it gets people all up in arms when you make changes. Now, Daevin Hobbs has no new commitment date set. What do we do with all this? Should Carolina fans be worried?
Yeah, I think that's the key. How far back are we talking here? And he might not know as of July 27th or 28th, but if he's talking, well, we still want to do it in early August, I don't think there's a whole lot of cause for pause from the hype standpoint, from the Carolina perspective. But we did check in with him over the last 24 hours at SI, and he's going to take a visit this weekend to a school we've already talked about. He's going to go to Alabama to check out the Crimson Tide, one of the newest options on his offer list. So in that regard, if he's a priority for Saban and company, yeah, maybe you start to worry. But I think it still goes back to the timeline. Does he do it the first couple weeks of August? Does he still want to get it done before his high school season begins in 2022, which would put him committing in the next few weeks? I think you're probably still safe because there was so much Carolina momentum going into this August 1st date. But if he starts to talk about, well, I'm going to push it into the season, and then he's going to take more game visits, and then a Tennessee can get back involved. Does Georgia get back involved? Does the pool grow in terms of the contenders for Hobbs? And I think that's where the worry should really have a little bit more substance in that regard. But we're still not sure what the plan is beyond this Alabama visit. It could just be an itch he needs to scratch to get over to Tuscaloosa because, hey, maybe, they started calling him a little bit more over the last couple weeks. But still, I do think Carolina today is in the driver's seat in this recruitment. And I think, you might have to earn it a little bit more, but I think that should be something that Carolina fans welcome. If you want to run with the big boys, as they say, you got to compete head to head, and you start winning some of those battles, and you've got a chance to continue to ascend towards your ceiling. And I think this could be one of those interesting case studies because not a whole lot of kids, especially on defense, as we talked about with Kaleb Downs, not a whole lot of kids saying no to Nick Saban these days. But we'll see. We'll see how the visit goes, and we'll see what the timeline looks like thereafter. To me, if it's still in the month of August, I think you're still in great shape. If it starts to push beyond that point, we'll start to take a step back as we look at it going forward.
That's so interesting. And I love your point there about like, hey, if Carolina is going to compete with the big boys, it's not like Mack Brown and the coaching staff are just going to lay down and say, oh, well, Nick Saban wants him. Good try. Like clearly they're going all in too to hang on to what seems like somebody that they thought they already had.
100%. You've got to do it. You've got to want it. And look, Mack has gone head-to-head before. I mean, Drake Maye was a Bama commitment who flipped to North Carolina a couple cycles ago. I mean, this is something that we talk about a lot. Keyshawn Silver was an Alabama target. I mean, there are several examples that we could go on here on this current Carolina roster. But yeah, more frequency in that regard is maybe scary to some in the fan base, but if that's where you want to be, that's who you've got to start beating on the recruiting trail. And then you have a better chance to beat them on the field. And that's the formula, right? And that's the formula to contend at the highest level. And if you're a Carolina fan, that means ACC titles, college football playoff appearances, two things that have eluded the program for quite some time. So yeah, I think that's the next natural step in the progression there. So we'll see. You should welcome it to a degree, but obviously you should be realistic as well and say, well, let's not battle with every kid, with Alabama and Georgia, but it's part of the game, and that's where we're seeing Carolina try to assimilate towards from a recruiting perspective, and that's where they need to be.
Okay, so we'll wait to see what news we hear out of Hobbs camp coming out of the weekend. When does that start typically happening? Like, do you at SI check back in after the weekend? Do we wait and see what comes out on social media? How do you usually approach that, John?
It's a bit of both. We certainly try to respect the communication guidelines of just being a good human, although in this day and age it's not as common as you'd like. But yeah, I think it's a combination of allowing them to react how they want to react, and then we can check back in at our leisure at some point during next week. I think what works this time of year, Isaac, is that there's a dead period August 1st, and that's when it kicks back in. So I do think that a lot of kids are going to do some interviews those first couple of days of August, and then that will kind of be it unless they've got a commitment coming up. So I'm curious to see how far back Hobbs pushes, but we don't want to push him that much from our end.
Okay, very interesting. So, Carolina fan base, your hope is that this doesn't get pushed back too much. Maybe the hope is, hey, as a human, you just want to get flirted with a little bit. And it's like, man, if Bama's calling, I got to go to Tuscaloosa and check things out. Even if I never go, I stepped my foot in the door. And you kind of alluded to that, John, but is that a legitimate thing to say?
100%. It's not like Alabama offered him, 2.5 years ago, and it's just a matter of, hey, I never got to campus. This is something that has more recent traction. So it is, I think, for a lot of kids, it's an itch you want to scratch, to see what the fuss is about, even more so than anything individually. Like, hey, is this really, the mecca of the sport or the pinnacle of the sport right now? I mean, is it really that, or is it just something that people talk about? So yeah, I think from just humanely, you're curious. I'm curious. You're probably curious. I mean, it's just part of human nature in that regard. But yeah, I think it's something that maybe has to be a box that he checks before a final decision could be made. You want it when you have a decision to make. You know something, and we think that's Carolina's a great fit for him, and he's settled on that. But sometimes you want to counter to it. What? If there's anything that can pull me off Carolina, let me explore that just to check my own, bases there. And if that's Alabama, it is what it is. But if he is Carolina through and through, you will survive this Alabama visit. And again, those are the kind of certainly recruits that you want to pull to North Carolina. And optically, those are the kind of battles you want to win because it elevates the perception around your program. And that usually translates to more success on the trail itself.
Love that. All right. Well, here's to hoping it's one last date before we get engaged. That's what I'm going to hold to, and we're going to see how that plays out. John Garcia Jr., brother, as always, thank you so much for your time. Have a great weekend. Cannot wait to connect with you again next week.
Sounds good, Isaac. Thanks for having me back on.
That's it for today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels. Big thanks to John Garcia Jr. for all his great insight. Coming up tomorrow, big mailbag show. Lots of great questions. Can't wait to unpack those with you. It's been great. I'm so glad that you decided to make Locked on Tar Heels your first watch or your first listen today. Please don't forget, subscribe, smash the like button, and leave some great comments as you go back through it. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked on Heels. You can follow me on Twitter at Isaac Shade or John at Garcia Locked On. Get more on the ACC by making Locked On ACC your second listen today. Host Candace Cooper and the local experts of Locked On take you around the conference in 30 minutes, 5 days a week. Really appreciate you spending part of your Thursday hanging out with me, talking about Carolina football recruiting. Great stuff, and it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. Until tomorrow, peace!